ELI5 How did medieval rulers communicate to their entire population effectively? Simple, they didn't and they didn't need to. You might be used to a strong central government, but medieval rulers weren't like that. You had regional nobility, who handled local affairs. Local lords were responsible for collecting taxes and enforcing laws. They were highly independent for the most part. It took months to gather vassals and their retinues for war. It's not that information couldn't travel fast. Dude on a horse could travel pretty fast, but the number of things directly controlled by the central government was pretty small in that period. They didn't really. There was some systems used to help. In England we had a range of towers that would be lit on fire, to essentially form a chain reaction across the country in times of war, but communication was definitely difficult. I'm not 100% sure on the accuracy of this, but I remember reading a story about how ELI got out about a Roman emperor and spread through the empire. His wife at the time was away from the emperor and believed the news. She immediately remarried to secure protection and status, only to learn that her husband still lives. They didn't. Kingdoms at the time were highly decentralized. Word would be taken to the local lords and then relayed to the population by the local lords. Lords would be the one chiefly being informed of what was expected of them, and then they would enforce the new laws on their people. Outside of that, 80 of the day-to-day stuff would be decided by the local lord. The local lord was simply required to obey his king if needed and to raise taxes. Another thing I was always fascinated by is how the Spanish, English, and other European empires would command armies across the ocean. It would take months for the king to get updates on something as insanely huge as the US Revolutionary War and whatnot. Not to mention that they succeeded in many cases with this level of delay, though not in the case of the Revolutionary War obviously. Further to other answers, important stuff such as the new king would be proclaimed at every town's marketplace by messengers sent out from the court. They could take a while to reach outlying towns. The current king was proclaimed in Edinburgh 3 days after his accession, as that is how long a rider on fast horses would have taken to get there from London. Thanks all for the interesting responses. I expected, in part, to hear about people delivering messages by horse, but had forgotten about town criers and didn't expect that they didn't give a shit, which made me laugh. Thanks for all the high quality answers folks. They didn't. Usually communication would be on an as-needed basis. Kings would inform lords of what was needed, for example, and they would act upon that information, but peasants usually didn't know much outside their communities, even less about politics. Words would go down the food chain all the way down to local lords. There might be heralds in bigger cities. Word of mouth also contributed a lot. Travelers, merchants, minstrels all played an essential part in getting news around. Early medieval rulers would constantly have to tour their kingdom to visit their vassals at least once a year in order to reinforce laws, standards, taxation amounts, etc., else a new precedent would be set going forward. Forget medieval times. The Battle of New Orleans in 1815 was fought 2 weeks after the peace treaty had been signed. The general who won this pointless battle later went on to become President of the United States. Town criers are a thing. Hear ye, hear ye, hear ye. 3A73 a text 3 to town crier 2C also called Duke makes public pronouncements as required. Provs Flow 1 Town criers. Priestly sermons. Nailing proclamations to the church doors. There's a reason Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the church door. It was a common practice at the time. News and gossip was spread through the church. The church was a village meeting. It's also one of several reasons why there was virtually no separation of church and kingdom back then. A town crier, also called a bellman, one is an officer of the royal court or public authority who makes public pronouncements as required. There was a time in medieval Germany when the king was traveling most of the time to ensure his influence over the different areas. It was called Wahlkönig. They had local barons, dukes, knights, etc. who would receive the orders or instructions from the king and then carry them out. It was all about delegation, and for the most part, people didn't need to know. They would just get on with their lives. Most of what impacted them happened in their own village. Sometimes peasants wouldn't even know they are in a different country now until much later, weeks or even months after wars ended. Messengers on horseback. Signal fires. Ships. Town criers. Town hall meetings. Gatherings. Royal tours. Homing pigeons.